I'm really excited to have this conversation with Dr. Erica Bove. We've been planning this for months, and I kind of like that it's happening on this very hot, beautiful day in July that we're speaking because it's allowed us to evolve what we're going to address and get to know one another better before even having this conversation. So, before I say more about you, I just want to express a really warm welcome to you.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Stockwell. It is so lovely to be in your presence. And I learn something every single week from your newsletters. And I don't know that the threads of your thoughts and your coaching and just the lens that you have for this relationship work, it just has really enriched my life. And so thank you for having me today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. I definitely receive that. I aspire to serve in that way. So thank you for giving me that. So before we were talking, it was very fun to discover that we have not exactly the same stomping grounds, but I spent a lot of my life in the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York and took the ferry to Vermont, which is where you're based. So it was fun to have that connection. But let me go ahead and read your bio so people have a sense of who you are as we talk, but a sense of what you've accomplished thus far. So, Dr. Erica Bove is a double board certified OBGYN and reproductive endocrinologist at the University of Vermont, as well as a certified life coach through the Life Coach School. And I just want to say one of the things actually that I enjoy about my podcast is I have some listeners who are extremely erudite, sophisticated, smart, high performing people who would have easily been able to divine every word I just said. And for those of you who have no reason to be familiar with medical terminology and didn't study Latin in high school or college, and so wouldn't know, you are really welcome here as well. And I just want to simply say that reproductive endocrinologist refers to, well, why don't you say, Erica, what it is that you do so that everyone can understand where your heart and mind is in your doctor professional world?
Absolutely. Some people refer to us as fertility specialists, and we are definitely that. We help people get pregnant, we help people stay pregnant. But reproductive endocrinology actually encompasses a much wider range of female problems. Um, Abnormal menopause is one of them, or even normal menopause where people are suffering. We help people a lot with their hormone balance. Abnormal puberty. So it's really full spectrum care for women that focuses on anything that is reproductive hormone related.
That's so interesting, actually. Just I haven't thought about it before because I think of OBGYN as the specialty that really focuses on women's anatomy. And now just hearing you talk about reproductive endocrinology, it's the specialty that really functions in certain ways with how female bodies function as female bodies. So what a beautiful thing to be immersed in. So I'll just
And can I share one more thing?
yes, please.
When I was in Michigan, about a third of my patients were transgender in all of the directions. And so that's another thing you can do with reproductive endocrinology is help people discover who they are and help them transition in whatever way they need to. So that's sort of another tool we have in our toolkit.
Do you think of your role as helping them discover who they are or helping them have that be expressed, which seems like a different project?
Yes, absolutely. I think it depends on where people are and, and what they're looking for, because some people come to us and they really are in a questioning, unclear state. And so with a multidisciplinary team, we help them figure out who they are and what makes the most sense. I think it's very different if you're 80 years old compared to if you're 14 years old, and we see the full gamut. And so it's a very interesting process. Some people say, I know what I want. Can we just move through the steps of getting me there? And we say, sure. Other times it's more of a discovery, which I think is also very interesting as well.
Okay, well, that's a conversation we're not going to have right now, but is super interesting, and thank you. I want to actually, rather than my reading this, why don't you talk about what you do as a coach? We talked about what you do as a physician. What is it that you do as a coach? Because I have to say, it really warms my heart whenever you talk about your work, what your mission is, and how you actually embody it and serve women and families.
Thank you so much. So I decided to become a coach in 2021, mostly because I was working as a fertility specialist in the clinic, mostly seeing fertility patients who were just so underserved in terms of their emotional experience and, ability to move through the process unscathed, right? And so I was seeing all these professional women who were so competent in their jobs as surgeons, as physicians, as lawyers, but the fertility process just brought them to their knees in terms of, hopelessness, despair, inability to make a decision, and it just stole their power, and it made me so upset for them on a very human level, but then also I wanted to help them make decisions that would help them build their families and give them the tools that they needed. And as I was engaging in coaching for my own personal reasons, I thought to myself, I think this is just what my patients need. They need these tools to be able to help themselves through the process. And so my goal really is to empower women professionals to build their families with confidence and compassion. And so what that means is when people are feeling so distraught by the process, when they feel completely disempowered, completely hopeless, I meet with them. We see if it's a good fit. And if it is, through one on one coaching, using coaching tools to give them back their power and also calm their nervous system and help them feel better on a day to day basis, that really helps. And then we also have support groups every other Friday night where the clients, if they want to, come together and help each other through. And so I'm passionate about this. I adore this work, and the transformation is just so striking. And it really makes me know deep in my soul that I'm making a difference for people who would otherwise have these deep emotional needs unmet.
One element that comes to mind when you say that is also how profoundly different the infertility journey is for the woman who is wanting to become pregnant and the man who is wanting to become a father in a heteronormative context. And I actually was interviewed on a podcast recently about how to reconnect when the couple is at different stages, either in the IVF journey or if they won't be having children, how to move on. Like there's so much that comes up in the individual journey, and then also having the two journeys be true to each of the people going through it without creating loneliness and disconnection because they're on the same journey but walking that path in different ways. So I wanted to really, well, first of all, give a shout out to your really incredible work. And anyone who is in the childbearing years or knows people in the childbearing years, either, well, maybe you yourself, or lots of people who are navigating this very treacherous, tricky, hope-filled and hope-dashing terrain. And so I really wanted to give a shout out so that anyone who's looking for someone to walk the path, not just in terms of interventions, but to walk the path of your heart and your identity and your mind, that you, Erica, provide that. Anything you want to say before I say the next thing?
No, that's exactly what it is. It's walking with people and supporting them and guiding them and helping them navigate their journey with their values, with their partners if they have a partner, and also helping people come together and figure out, where are they aligned, where are their differences, and how can people have conversations around this where both people feel seen and heard and valued and truly aligned, right? It's the two people versus the problem, not two people versus each other. So we do a lot of work in that way as well.
Yes, and particularly in this arena, how to navigate disappointment and blame, even when you don't want to feel that way. This is so rich. And in my estimation, one of the ways to become an excellent coach is to have the best coaching that you can access and to allow your expertise and genius to really develop in the area that you serve and still be open to guidance and coaching in other areas. It's not exactly humility as opposed to just really understanding the power of coaching and knowing that if you're a great coach in one area, that coaching will serve you in another. And so I really want to kind of drive that home, that working with a coach or therapist for that matter is such a strategic move when there's an area in which someone feels stuck or unfulfilled in some ways. And that, in my opinion, the smartest people get the help rather than try to figure it out for themselves. So that's just a point that I haven't really overtly said on the podcast in, the 180 plus episodes I've done. So this was a moment to bring that, because I feel like the conversation you and I are about to have has these unique flavors, because you are clearly an excellent coach serving women and families on the infertility journey, which includes a lot of relationship coaching, I'm sure. And yet the conversation that we are going to pivot into has more to do with your experience in your own relationship. And so before we go further, I just really want to honor and thank you for your willingness to show up in your expertise and in your willingness to learn.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. I'm really, really happy to be here.
Okay, wonderful. So in our months of anticipating this conversation, one of the things that comes out is that you and your partner have enrolled in the Aligned and Hot Marriage program. But before we get into that, will you just, in broad strokes, give some of the context of your relationship?
Sure. So Michael and I met at a funeral. I'm not sure if you knew that.
I didn't.
About a
It
year and a
makes me
half
think of
ago.
The Big Chill, but anyway.
Yeah. I was in Southern Illinois, kind of near the Kentucky border, because one of my close college friends, his father had passed. And so I just had this very deep intuitive knowing that I needed to go to this funeral. So, right. So I'm based in upstate New York / Vermont. I have 2 children. I have a job, like all the things. I'm like, I have to go to this funeral. I can't explain it, but I have to go. So I made all the arrangements. I went about a year and a half ago. And in the back of the funeral home was this very handsome, gregarious man telling this story about these urns, these like centuries old urns that he was trying to get through a turnstile in a New York City hotel, right?
Okay.
So you have the visual, right?
Yeah,
And
totally.
he was like right at the climax of the story, and my phone goes off and it's my kids. Okay. And I'm divorced. Like I said, I have 2 children. They're 9 and 11, and I get 5 to 10 minutes a night where I can talk to them. And so I had to be kind of awkward. And I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I really want to hear the end of the story, but it's my kids and I'm divorced." And he goes, "Say no more. I'm divorced too. I understand. Go talk to your kids." Right. So I leave. I was not the only one listening to the story. And I thought to myself, I just have to get back to him to hear the end of the story. So I sought him out before the calling hours were over, and I did find out how the story ended. But then we ended up spending the whole weekend together in the context of this family honoring of the life of this man, Peter, who was actually Michael's godfather. So that's the context. And so, I really respected him. I thought he was very handsome. I thought his son was, amazingly well behaved and dressed and all those things. And then at the end of the weekend, my friend whose father had passed said, "I've just always thought you two would be really great together. I just never knew how you would meet. But now you've met." And there's a whole other story about a thought experiment they had done the previous summer, where Kevin had actually, like Michael had manifested that that he wanted to know that there was somebody out there for him. And Kevin had suggested me. However, I was in another relationship at the time. So the whole thing just felt very kind of divinely guided in a way that we met when we were supposed to meet, and we really enjoyed our time together. So we kept in touch. We actually fell in love from afar. On Valentine's Day, he sent me a book to my house, which anybody who knows me knows that that's the way to my heart, is books and not flowers or chocolate. And he invited me out in April to spend a week with him, just the 2 of us, and that we would spend a week together over the Easter holiday. So I did. I took a leap of faith. I went out there. We had a wonderful week together, and just very trusting the entire time that this was what was meant to be. And, a very exciting start to the relationship. Right. So Michael has been married twice before. He has 3 children, with 2 different female partners, for those children. A really terrible divorce. I mean, just really, really divorce, post-divorce, awful. I will also share that my divorce was terrible as well. I mean, I'd never wish that upon anybody. And so I think that one thing that binds us is that we're very intentional about what we want to create. And so even though we're not married, even though the relationship was still relatively new, I thought to myself, I really want to invest in us having a strong relationship, given that we've both been through terrible relationships. And I want to kind of continue this good energy forward and not fall back into old patterns. And I just love the name too. The Aligned in Hot Marriage is just kind of a draw. So I got it for us for Christmas this year. And we've been, slowly working our way through, but we are long distance. So if we have date nights, it's always a question, okay, so are we going to do the program? Are we going to talk about something else? And I will be honest, like our date nights in the last few months have kind of fallen off for various reasons. And so that's where we are. The sessions that we've done have been extremely wonderful. And we have a date tonight to do more. But that's sort of the context, if that's helpful.
It's really helpful. And you're such a wonderful storyteller, too. I can only imagine when the two of you are having dialogue back and forth with your interest and enthusiasm about human experience. So I think what I'd like to do actually is just make a few comments. First of all, the courage it takes to fall in love and be happy after a really intense divorce and whatever came before that divorce. I think for people who haven't been through it, it's very hard to imagine. Now, I myself have not been through it, but I feel like I've been close enough to just have the utmost respect for the courage it takes. And when that's the situation, pacing is so important so that it remains calibrated, because that is not the situation to kind of, I don't know that I'd encourage it in any other circumstance, but certainly it's the situation not to fly into fantasy and to have the shoulds of we should do this, we should get married, like all that really makes it harder to be authentic. And any relationship that you and Michael build together needs to have room for whatever is arising in either one of you at any given time, including when it's out of sync. One of you could just be feeling like so gratified and so filled with hope at a time when the other one has all the fears coming up. And what if it turns out the way it, and so one of the kind of high levels of play required in your relationship is this sensibility of authentic pacing and not pushing anything too much. So I just want to add that in terms of how you're thinking about it. I don't know exactly how many of the 8 modules you've gotten through since December, but however many it is, it's the exact right amount.
Think that's so helpful to hear. And in the beginning, I think it's like exciting and full of possibility. And at the time, I wasn't working, a tremendous amount, so I had a lot of time to fly out to Chicago, and it was very romantic and fun, and kind of not a ton of other attachments either, right? Obviously, I have my children, but when they're with their father, they're good, And so that was a very different energy. And then, I took a job, that consumes a lot of time, and started my coaching practice and have the 2 children. And then he actually lost his job. And so if you can imagine the time differences of that, and I should mention, he's a full-time single dad. He has full custody of his 13-year-old. And so he has less ability to travel during the school year because of that. And so trying to navigate these life things, right, in the context of long distance, you realize that it's not going to be sort of a fantasy forever. And at the same time, wanting that spaciousness, wanting that, like, can we please be dating still? Can we not have all these planning and serious conversations come in right now? I need this to be more light. Those are the things we talk about from time to time, because I do think we do have different waves of where we're at. And I think attachment styles come into things too. But it's very validating to hear you say that.
I'm glad. And, I think there's a lot of value in everything that's in the Aligned and Hot Marriage program, or I wouldn't have created it. And I have a really deep appreciation for what you've said, where even if between the two of you things are not heavy, you've each had life circumstances which were heavy, or in your case, at least busy. And one of the things, this comes up a lot when I'm coaching couples, where when there's real challenge, as there often is, not always, but often, there is this desire for just having some lightness, having some fun, having some just not requiring so much effort. And the thing is that when things are challenging in life, honestly, whether it's individually, like he's lost his job, I don't know how that impacts him and we don't need to discuss that, but I'm just imagining that it does not feel good, whether or not it brings additional stressors that aren't only emotional or not, that the heaviness is in an individual's life or in the shared life. And if you were living together in the same house, that distinction would not be as great as it can be because you're living, so many states away from one another, states in the country. With all of that, it's really helpful to find ways to connect that are light but still meaningful. What I was gonna say is light but still deep. It's just that could sound confusing. I don't mean to say something that, I don't mean to be confusing. I mean that it's light, but you feel more connected afterwards. And so I'd like to give you something that you can do that would be like that. There are a lot of different variations on this, but this is one that could really just be very light and simple. And that is rosebud thorn, which is used in various contexts, but I'm going to teach how to do it in a relationship context, where you say the rose is something that you're happy about, that you celebrate, that you feel good about, something that's blossoming. The bud is something that you're looking forward to. And the thorn is something that's challenging or you're concerned about. And it doesn't need, rosebud thorn is how I say it, but I wouldn't necessarily put the thorn last. It can be in any order. And the goal with this is that one of you gives a rosebud and thorn, and then the other one gives a rosebud and thorn, and you don't need to talk about it. You might choose to. There might be a really appealing conversation, but if not, you just move on. But it means that you've touched something a little bit deeper without being dragged into something that makes you dread getting on a Zoom call together,
That's right. That's really helpful. And do you recommend that like daily or as the spirit moves? Like what is your thought about
You know
that?
what? It's so interesting that you say that, because I believe in pacing that works for people. So actually, you're reminding me, I don't have it off the top of my head, but I have a free document which I will put in the show notes, but it's called relationship check-ins. And it's a way to check in. You could do it daily. I have listed a way that's daily, a way that's weekly, a way that's monthly, a way that's quarterly, and a way that's annually. But you can mix and match, and you can take the one that I list for daily and do it once a month or once a week. And so in terms of whether or not to do it daily, I would say that really depends on your relationship. But if you do it daily, then feel free to leave it as a voice memo or a written text. In other words, you can transfer it asynchronously, but then do it verbally on video when you're having a video call. So it's not a burden, it's just an extra pleasure.
That's wonderful. Yeah, thank you for that. Because I think, one of the things that is tough is that when we see each other, it's wonderful and steamy and fun and light. And in the weeks and sometimes months, we try to not go more than 6 weeks, but sometimes that, life gets in the way. It can just feel more mundane and like, even though we don't live together, domestic, like, how are your parents? How are your parents? And, um, it's nice to kind of have a little bit more, meaningfulness, I think is a good way to say it. And spark as well. That's important as well. but that this might be a way to kind of infuse a little bit more depth and non-mundane to the equation.
Let's go ahead and practice that right now. So
Okay.
with relationship to your relationship,
Yep.
what would be a rose, a bud, and a thorn?
So a bud is that I'm speaking in New Mexico in July, and there's a very good chance that he will be able to come and be my plus one. So I'm looking forward to that as a possibility. A rose is that we went on vacation last week together to Montana to Glacier, which was a bucket list item for me. And we did a lot of fun things outside in nature that we had not done before. So we went hiking and did some challenging hikes together. And we went on a kayaking tour that was also really wonderful. And I mean, there's also an age difference too. And, I'm really into exercise. He's a former athlete, but maybe doesn't make it as much of a part of his daily life at this stage of his life. And so I was sort of wondering how that was going to go, and it went really beautifully. And so, at least for this moment in time, I was like, we can enjoy exercise and nature outside together in a way that fills both of our cups and gives us adventure. So that was a rose, and a thorn. I think a thorn is really trying to figure out what feels like obligation and what can feel more spontaneous, right? So I think there's this balance between rituals. So like in the morning, I usually call him on my way into work, and then at night, if I have energy, we talk. If not, I go straight to bed. But sometimes I said to him, sometimes those conversations feel like obligations and not kind of more like fun and light and all those things. And so just trying to figure out like how to have a romantic, steamy, light dating relationship that doesn't get dragged down by like already having these sort of obligations. If that makes sense.
It definitely does. And those are magnificent rosebud thorns. And I want to just share for everyone listening, as well as you, that you went inside and saw what emerged, and it was such a soulful sharing. And that's great. And it also can be like super practical and specific. Like the thorn is that, you're working an overnight shift tomorrow and you dread being exhausted. Like it doesn't need to feel like soulful, heartfelt things, and it absolutely can. That's the whole point of how it could serve for the two of you, that there's so much freedom in it. That's the point I'm really wanting to make. So once one of you shares your rose, your bud, and your thorn, after each one, the other one just says thank you. And for me, saying thank you with these kinds of shares is basically code for I hear you. I'm glad you told me. And there's no need to problem solve or ask follow-up questions unless, something wasn't clear. You want the communication to be clear. But actually, that leads me into another topic for you, which is that I think one of the things that really trips people up, especially in romantic relationships, but not only, is not being adequately clear what kind of a communication you're having, and specifically having both people be aligned and on the same page about which kind of a communication it is. So one of the stereotypical things might be that is totally stereotypical, but I'm just going to go with it because it popped into my head, that, a woman is sharing something and it's emotional and she's sharing her feelings, and then he can tell there's a problem, and so he starts making suggestions about how to fix it, and she just becomes furious because for her, the kind of conversation they were having is the one where she gets to express herself and he just is with her, so she doesn't have to be alone with all of her feelings and can just maybe embrace her or say that sounds hard or something very simple. But he, wanting to know what his role is, figures if she's sharing problems that are upsetting her, his role is to fix them. Or in other places comes out as if one person thinks the conversation is venting, and then the other person is paying very close attention and thinks, well, it's problem solving or it's accusatory. Or what also happens is one person will think the conversation is logistical and the other one will feel very hurt and resentful because they're missing some emotional content in this moment. So
Yes.
I
That one
think,
resonates.
okay, okay, well, actually, here's something you could do together, and not all at once, not all tonight. I really trust your pacing. There's clearly, you can trust your intuition if you went to that funeral and this is what came of it. But when I'm coaching couples, there often comes a moment where it's clear the two people didn't have the same assumption about the kind of communication they were having. And so in that situation, I often have a couple just make a list of the different kinds of communications that they have. And not all couples have the same list. There are some general ones like logistics, problem solving, emotional support, hopefully. But sometimes there could be 12 different kinds, sometimes 6. And as I say, this is something that each person needs to think about for themselves. And then you make a list that includes everything on both lists. And it may or may not look like another couple's. But the advantage to getting clear about that is that in any given moment, you can name what kind of conversation you want to have. And this is true if you're living with someone, but it's also true in a particular way if you're long distance, because you haven't just spent the afternoon together. So you don't know everything that's happened before. You're not reading one another's body language. You weren't there when the kid said something that was annoying. Like, you don't have that shared moment to moment experience. And it's not shared when people have different stressful times at work, but you kind of get used to reading one another's body language when you walk in the door in order to be caught up before you even begin the interaction. So it would particularly help you in a long distance context to actually from the beginning say what kind of a communication you want to have, which makes it way more likely that that's the kind of communication that will happen. So for example, I'd like to tell you about my day and just have you listen and tell me what you find interesting in it. That's not like a particular type of communication. That was just the structure to make this point. Or you could say, I really want to vent. I don't need any ideas. I just want to vent and would appreciate if you'd be open to listening. Or, and then you want to say, are you? You can get opt-in when it's not just informing what kind of interaction you want to have and then proceeding. You want to say and check that the other person's available because they may not be in the mood for one of those kinds of communications. But if you are on the same page about what kind of communication you're having, it's going to be far more fulfilling, satisfying, and uncomplicated to go ahead and have that communication.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense.
So transitioning to this wonderful tension between obligation and kind of joyful, delighting interaction. I'm going to use an analogy that is sometimes used in people who talk about masculine and feminine energies. A lot of what's said about that, I think, is really way too simplistic and really not helpful. But what I'm about to say, is helpful, which is to think of structure, or let's say masculine energy, as a cup, and feminine energy or spontaneity and the unexpected, mysterious, playful, whimsical as what goes in the cup. So if your cup, your structure is to talk every evening, I encourage you to continue. I think that's fantastic for growing a relationship. But you can do that pouring all kinds of different beverages, hot and cold, with ice, steamy, sweet, bland. You can put all kinds of things in there. So let's talk about how to vary what goes in there. Does that speak to you, that analogy?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
Because if you just pour the beverage without having a cup, as this is a metaphor, that does not cultivate a relationship. It doesn't take care of the safety and the consistency. So one of the main things you can do is have a lot of variety in the types of communications you're putting into your cup meaning your evening conversations. So rather than just checking in or giving a daily update, both wonderful types of communications, but not really the only kind if you want it to feel juicy. But maybe you talk gibberish. Maybe you read one another poetry. Maybe you interact as characters in a movie you both love. Maybe you start describing your ideal vacation and never say anything about what happened in the day. I mean, I'm just getting started. It's up to you to come up with the things that would be appealing for you and for him. Having your daily check-in, but doing it in another language if there's a language you both speak. There are all kinds of ways to just add spice and up level what you're drinking, what you're nourishing yourself with, while having that cup of daily communication be wonderfully consistent and reliable and something you can count on.
As you're saying this, I thought, in order to do that, I need to get out of my own way. I need to, because in the morning, right, I'm driving in and I'm still having my first cup of coffee and everything. Like, I think that as I've gotten busier, I get a little bit mired in like overwhelm and sort of the tasks and the very practical things that keep that energy somewhat tethered, or it doesn't allow that full expression. And so maybe for us, the morning is not that time. Maybe it's the evening, or maybe I figure out a way to, just channel that energy a little differently, right? Or not have, see expectations, right? Maybe not have quite such lofty expectations for myself, because I think I block that in a way that I need to.
Because you speak in the mornings. I started talking about the evenings, but did I just introduce that? Because sometimes you talk in the evening, sometimes you don't. It's the morning call that feels obligatory.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's go with that. So I was thinking, since you love books, that you could just pick up a book on your shelf and open to a random page and read it, but none of that is appropriate for while you're driving to work. So let me offer you a few other options. One is that you just listen to a song together. What I'm hearing is really important is that you feel embodied on your morning drive, that when you're embodied, you're then available for the quality of connection you want with him. And if he just feels like something that's towards the top of your to-do list, of course it's obligatory and it's inefficient, and you just want to move to the next things on your list because you're in that mode. So the key is deciding whether you're available to wait to be in that mode until you get to work. That's the first question. Are you available to wait to get into that mode until you actually have a to-do list you need to work through?
Right. My once I get to work, it's like it just goes kind of crazy, at least my clinical job.
So are you available to wait to get that way until you park your car? Or do you need to start to transition into that when you leave your home?
Oh yeah, no, I think I could. I need to retrain myself.
It's a complex question.
Yeah. I think truly, Alexandra, like when I wake up earlier and have more time, more spaciousness in my mornings, like meditation, then I feel I always meditate, but sometimes it's like boom, 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 right? But if I have that space in my morning to wake up, maybe to drink my first cup of coffee before I leave my house, though, then I'm more available. If I'm like rushing and, drinking my coffee on the way and multitasking, then that feels more like a checkbox. So it really depends.
Okay. Well, for the times when you don't have the frenetic urgency because you're late, which is different than being rushed, but actually late. But when you are available to pivot, if you just thought of it and figured out how, I'd like to give you something for those scenarios.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. And so for any of you watching on YouTube, you're in luck because you're going to get the visual, but I'm going to try to do the play by play because I know many more of you just listen. So I'm holding my forearm in view on the Zoom screen, and it's my left forearm, and taking my right hand with my fingers, starting at my left wrist, just very gently stroking down And actually, it's the inner forearm which is much more sensitive. The skin is more sensitive. So when you do that, just feather light or a little more firm with your fingers, very slowly stroking your inner forearm. How do you feel, Erica?
Relaxed. Feels nice.
Right?
Yeah.
This is something that I've done at business meetings with my hands under the desk. I have it up high so you can see it on the Zoom screen, but just actually bringing your attention and delicately, or more firmly if you like, but you'll find your way, just touching a sensitive part of you and feeling what that feels like brings you into your body.
Yeah.
And so if you did that before you started your car, or as long as there's no snowstorm and you're able to multitask, you can do this very gently while you're in your car, or that uses, I mean, I'm picturing your hands on the steering wheel. So, maybe you have one hand on the steering wheel and the other hand is just like very sensually, slowly touching the back of your neck. Like this is not a pat, it's not going anywhere. It's just taking your hand and creating some sensual aliveness in your body. And you can hear while I do this, my breath is slower, my voice is lower. This is just the natural consequence of landing back into our body, which, sure, it could take a hot bath for 40 minutes but it also just takes a moment of taking your hand and touching yourself in a sensual way.
So brilliant. And Michael and I talk about this, like, you know, I don't know if this is like a gender thing or an individual thing. I think we're taught that men are just always thinking about sex, right? Or or anything physical. But for me, I feel like sensuality is like 2 layers deep. That's the best way I can describe it. And once I'm there and it's wonderful. At the same time, I mean, I guess it's the same with emotion sometimes too, right? But I would like it to be closer to the surface. And this to me feels like a way to peel off those layers and to get that part of me closer to the surface. That makes sense. This is brilliant.
It does, and what I love about it in the context of what you've just said is this is you bringing yourself out, de-armoring, as opposed to making him work to go in and find you, which is the way it often goes. Yeah. And I will just add, because I think you'll find it very interesting, and I want anyone listening to know too, that I once taught this in a workshop. And the next day, a woman emailed me and said, is it normal if you've been sexually abused for this to be too difficult to do? And the reason that I say that is, well, that's like my warning label, but also, so if this is relevant and you're listening, then just be really gentle. But the main reason that this is true is because if someone has been traumatized and isn't comfortable with sensuality, literally just gently stroking the forearm by oneself in a totally safe context is too much, because it really does bring you into your sensuality. And so let me also say, you and I just did it, Erica, but I recommend you practice doing this before you're driving, because you want to be able to just safely, this is not masturbating. This is just oh so gently touching your skin and becoming sensually alive, which contributes to the kind of presence and is an antidote to the to-do list energy. So long distance relationship, talking on the phone, or honestly very much short distance, same house, kids, stresses, overwhelm, you're not in the mood for flirtatious or sensual experiences, take a moment in your car before you come in the door to just connect with yourself in the way I'm describing, or do it under the dinner table, with your hand. Like, no one needs to know. This is for you to feel better in this way when that's what you want. When something feels like obligation, then the question is, okay, well, what do I want to give that I'm not, or what do I want to receive that I'm not? That's the way out of the sense of obligation. Tell me what you've gotten from our conversation thus far.
I mean, this kind of, as my 11-year-old son would say, as he goes, mind blown, right? He makes this visual. That's how I feel right now about this. Why I know it's there, that energy. It just, that's at least what I tell myself, is it's just 2 layers deep, right? And so the question is how to access that. Because I don't enjoy that. I don't like that it's buried, right? It just, that it's something that I experience as my reality most of the time. And so I think that this sort of, I'm a huge fan of embodiment, right? Like that particular exercise of me disarming myself instead of having somebody else work for it. I think that could be really helpful, especially at those times where where I get in my head, the overwhelm comes, and it's like to do my, to manage the anxiety, I just make my to-do list longer and then attack it. That's not a very playful, sensual energy. And then, with the long distance component, then your mind kind of goes to places. You're like, well, I'm self-sufficient, or I'm so independent, and this is lovely. But I've got this. And so I think sometimes the mind is the devil's playground, as they say, right? And so I think this exercise will help me stay more connected to that part of myself and unbury that part of myself.
Yeah, I think so too. And I encourage you to make a menu for what invites out your sensual, playful, sexy, womanly way. And so this is one. And honestly, maybe you get in the habit of, when you start driving your car, putting erotica in and having the, instead of the news, or I don't know what podcast you listen to on the way to work, but find your erotica channel that, like podcast or books or whatever. And those are just some, and that might not speak to you, but you can have a custom menu, which ideally has at least 3 things on it, because, as with everything else, you're going to want some variety there. So go as far as you want with the inner arm touching that I have shared with you. And I'm just encouraging you to notice what else. Maybe you get some kind of a cup holder for your car, and you have fresh flowers in it. And they don't last that long because the weather is not that way. Or maybe they're not fresh. Maybe they're, artificial in some way. But just notice, like, what is there a particular scent that you enjoy, or a beverage? Like, just note that everything that I'm saying, there are things that are sensual. I mean, erotica is a different category, but I mean, like, something for your eyes, nose, mouth, touch, smell. So anything that's sensual has the potential for you to be responsive to it, and to just notice, what are those things.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I have the sense we're kind of complete, but is there anything that arising in you that is related that I can respond to?
Yeah. Well, that you said at the beginning, the pacing of the program is just right for us, right? And so that's something where it's like, okay, maybe it plays into that sense of obligation, right? In terms of like, do we do the date nights at this certain regularity? Do we not? Like, that's something that it's like, okay, so when you have a long distance relationship, or any relationship really that's busy with other, responsibilities, there needs to be some planning. And at the same time, there needs to be some spontaneity as well, right? So that's sort of, okay, like, with what regularity to do the date nights. When does it feel like, obligation? When does it feel like coming from a beautiful energy, those sorts of things. And then when we do decide to do the date nights, when do we delve into the program and when do we choose a different activity? Right. So those, yeah.
Okay, those are great questions, and I'm gonna generalize it for people who live in the same house as well. I need to explain this. So when I say it, don't draw conclusions right away. But I'm not really a fan of date nights because they can be obligation and the same superficial conversations that people always have. Like dinner and a movie, and the dinner conversation is not interchangeable week to week. That is better than nothing, but it doesn't actually stoke the fire. It doesn't deepen intimacy. It doesn't create more connection. As I say, it's better than nothing. So I think the key is actually to aim for experiences that are connecting. So if that's what you mean by date night, great. That is not what many people mean by date night. They mean they go do certain things together. And I think the much more important thing is to focus on it being a connecting or connected experience. Now, in terms of the frequency, once a week is wonderful, and that may or may not fit your lives. I can't speak to that, but that's a very nice rhythm because it means you're never more than 3.5 days from having had a date or heading into the next one. That's why that's nice. And the regularity builds something good. However, what I want to say next is that I'm a big fan of scheduling sex, but not scheduling orgasms, not scheduling particular sexual activities, but scheduling that you're both going to put attention on your sexual connection. So again, this is not for the long distance context, but that can look like, scheduling a sex date can look like lying together naked and falling asleep without even kissing. But, or it can look like taking a walk and making out on the street corner. Like what it actually is going to depend on where each person is and what they feel like, but it means that there's time set aside to deepen the connection, or in this instance, like deepen the sensual, sexual connection. But again, what that actually looks like can be highly varied. So in terms of your long distance relationship, let's say the two of you choose once a week, then when you come to that date, or maybe in advance you plan, either, like it's going to make sense either way, you can choose what would feel connecting. So maybe what would feel connecting is you do a striptease. Maybe what would feel connecting is doing the next module in the Aligned and Hot Marriage program. Maybe what would be connecting is to start watching one of the videos. They're all about 10 or 15 minutes long, and stopping 6 minutes in because it makes one of you think of a really funny story from 20 years ago that you've never shared with one another. And so you press pause, stop the share screening, and the rest of the time you're just laughing about that story. Maybe it means learning to knit, both of you, if you don't know how. Like, I mean to give a whole spectrum, because learning something new together is bonding, and it does not need to be relationship, personal growth, self-help related, as long as you're learning something new together. And I guess what I would say too is that I find it super helpful. My husband and I are not in a phase like this, but we've had so many phases where each month there's some focus of growth in our relationship. So it could be in terms of something sexual, it could be in terms of our fitness, like it could be something together. It could be that one month our focus is really in having more time for him to be alone and do his own thing and for me to be alone. Or it can be like, it could be something related to parenting, but just being really intentional about like, what's our focus this month has been very connecting in times when our schedules were otherwise super busy. And so whatever your general focus is, that doesn't have to, but it may influence what you do on the dates. And I guess one more thing I would add is that you can arrive at the date and then see what you're in the mood for or plan it ahead of time. But maybe one of the ways to create spontaneity is that sometimes he's completely responsible for what's going to happen in that date, and other times you are. And so then you get the fun of planning and having the kind of providing the kind of experience you think he would adore or you're really craving, or you get to show up and there's the surprise because you don't know if he's going to do a striptease for you, or he's going to say, let's do the next video in the Aligned and Hot Marriage program, or, you're going to learn Swahili together. Like, there is spontaneity if you take turns being in more of the giving role and more of the receiving role.
I love how creative you are, Alexandra, and I love how much you think, I would say, outside of the box, right? I just love your possibility thinking. It's amazing.
Well, thank you. I will say that not all, but a good portion of the suggestions I've made for you, I've never thought of before, but it's because I've cultivated permission to just think of what would be fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that is a useful skill.
Yeah, it really is. Wow.
I ask at the end of all of my coaching sessions, almost all, a question I'm going to ask you right now, which is, what are you taking from this conversation?
Better tools to get into my body and sort of go off script, so to speak, right? And sometimes I feel sort of stuck by my own emotions and don't know how to get out of that. Even though I'm a coach, right? We all have our own things we need to work on, and
For sure, we all do, yes.
So that I will definitely take with me, that very practical tool. And then permission to go at whatever pace we need to, permission to spice it up, change it up, have different code words for different types of communication. So just this kind of just much more expansive view of what, even a long-term relationship, long-term, hopefully, and long distance relationship, could look like.
I'm sure your questions and our conversation will have inspired many people. And for those who are in their infertility journey and looking for guidance, we'll have your information in the show notes, but why don't you say how people can find you?
Yeah, thank you. So the most comprehensive place is my website, and the address is loveandsciencefertility.com. I also have a podcast under the same name, as well as Instagram and Facebook as well. But yes, I am so, so grateful for this time together.
Me too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Since this recording, we have made the difficult decision to pause the relationship. Nothing in the content of the recording is negated by this fact. We decided to publish this as we hope it resonates and inspires. Here's to clarity, to connection, and permission to follow our intuition, even when it's the hardest thing to do.